Modern Treaties and Self-Government by Group 10. Throughout the past several hundred years, in an effort to suppress Indigenous self-determination, Europeans had actively restricted Indigenous self-government, the ability of Indigenous communities to manage and govern their own land, communities, and resources. As an effort to alleviate the harsh impacts caused by these actions, the Canadian government has been negotiating modern treaties with Indigenous communities, which are agreements made between both parties to recognize Indigenous rights to land and resources, along with the enhancement of culture, health, standard of living, and socioeconomic developments. With these treaties, also known as comprehensive land claims, Indigenous peoples may be able to gain all of the points stated here, along with the ability to manage them and their communities, regaining the ability to self-govern.
Let's start by addressing the parties that are involved in the modern-day treaties and self-governance. This includes the Indigenous people of Canada, including the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, federal, provincial, and territory governments, and the Royal Crown. Originally, these treaties were made between a specific Indigenous group or region and the Royal Crown, but now for negotiating treaties and subjects within the modern treaties, it is done between the Indigenous group and the Government of Canada. However, self-governance is now allowing Indigenous groups to practice their own form of government that they originally practiced before European settlers arrived.
What are the key dates and places? There are 26 modern-day treaties, 18 of which contain self-government. Self-governance was launched in 1995, and overall, these treaties cover over 40% of Canada's landmass. One of the first land claim agreements in Canada was the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. It was signed on November 11, 1975 in Quebec. The most recent negotiation was with the Métis Nation Saskatchewan. This agreement was signed in 2021 and was just recently updated as of February 24, 2023.
Modern-day treaties and self-governance lie under a political context. From the Government of Canada, it is said that treaties are agreements made between the Government of Canada, Indigenous groups, and often provinces and territories that define the ongoing rights and obligations on all sides. And self-governance is where self-governing First Nations can make their own laws and policies and have decision-making power in a broad range of matters. Through self-governance, Indigenous groups have been able to govern their own communities and lands, which allows the decisions affecting their nations to come from elected officials and not the government. With self-governance and modern-day treaties, it has allowed Indigenous groups to take back control of their communities and culture.
In Canada, all First Nations can provide their voice about matters that may be of concern. In cases where a nation doesn't have the resources or ability to exercise the right to self-governance, many different organizations can step in and fight for the voice and well-being of various Indigenous groups. An example of this is the Assembly of First Nations. An example of a modern treaty placing focus on the health and well-being of its members can be seen in the Whitefish River Nation's goals to provide health promotion, prevention, intervention, and post-prevention services as it relates to improving health outcomes, mental health and addiction services, harm reduction, and disease prevention. With these goals in mind, it is evident to see the level of effort being made by modern treaties to support the health of Aboriginal peoples in Canada.
Modern-day treaties gradually lead the nation towards reconciliation by providing agreements that allow First Nations assume control over their communities through select laws and policies. A few recent examples include the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, the Anishinaabe Nation Education Agreement, the Education Agreement in Nova Scotia, and many more. The transition from governance under the Indian Act to full self-governance is still in effect, but every time the Canadian government implements a treaty with the First Nations, the country moves a step closer towards reconciliation. Today, the Canadian government is working with the Indigenous community to smoothly transition away from the Indian Act and into self-governance through the signing of modern-day treaties, which recognize a few of the following: the Indigenous people's right to self-governance, the importance of healthcare, education, and housing for Indigenous people, and economic development opportunities.